Hey guys, this is Miss Regine from SOAR Educational Services, and today I'm going to do some SAT practice. We're going to start with SAT vocabulary, and while the formatting of the test has changed back and forth over the year, the skill needed to tackle unknown vocabulary is timeless. So we're going to look at ways we can do that. So if you can see for number one, it says to avoid being blank. Composer Stephen Sondheim strives for an element of surprise in his song. So in this sentence, you got to get the context. And the thing with the SAT, of course, you got to do it fast because it is time. But he is trying, he's striving. So if you know what striving, so this is something that he's trying to achieve, a goal that he's working towards. He wants to work towards an element of surprise. So and he wants to avoid something. So he wants to have an element of surprise. And what could he be trying to avoid? So erratic. If you know the meaning of erratic, it means unpredictable. So up and down. So, but that he wouldn't be trying to avoid being erratic if he wants that element of surprise. Informal, to avoid being informal. Composer Stephen Sondheim strives for an element of surprise. Um, Informal and surprise would not be antonym enough, where he's trying to avoid being informal and having an element of surprise. In fact, it might be to avoid being formal. Composer Stephen Sondheim strives for an element of surprise because that would make more sense. They would be more opposite of each other. To avoid being elaborate, composer Stephen Sondheim strives for an element of surprise. So elaborate meaning having a lot of detail, that would not work as far as having that element of surprise. And D, to avoid being predictable, composer Stephen Sondheim strives for an element of surprise. So the correct answer would be D, because he doesn't want to be predictable. Predictable meaning that everyone knows exactly what you're doing. So to avoid being predictable, he wants to have an element of surprise. All right, let's go on to number two. Because the pandas had already been weakened by disease and drought, a harsh winter would have had blank consequences for them. So we already have some terminology to describe what's going on with the pandas. So they're weak. Um, the winter, they've had disease and drought. So if all of these things have happened, a harsh winter would have had preventative consequence for them. So no, maybe a warm winter food, something like that. Preventative meaning something that would counteract all of the disease and the weakness that they've already encountered. Regressive, a harsh winter would have had regressive consequences for them. And that's something, you could maybe pen like, okay, that might be a maybe because we know regressive means something that you are going backwards on. So, you could see that a harsh winter could be pushed them back. Um, a harsh winter would have had catastrophic consequence for them. Okay, that's another one. So if we know catastrophic, think about if you have a natural disaster, you've heard that word catastrophic being used in that context. So a harsh winter would have been catastrophic for them. Um, then we have unforeseen. A harsh winter would have been unforeseen for them. Um, so that would be something that, I mean, it just would not fit in that context because unforeseen would be something you could not predict would happen, and probably the pandas probably would not predict a harsh winter, but they would not fit in this context. And then moderate. So moderate will be again something that counterbalance, maybe helps alleviate a little bit. So moderate would not make the most sense. So the best word to choose in this one, it would be catastrophic. It makes the most sense if you think about natural disasters or things like that. Catastrophic would make the most sense to go with. All right, let's look at number three. For many of the villagers, marriage was a practical blank, one not necessarily of one not necessarily blank of love, but nevertheless grounded largely in economic advantage. So marriage was a practical something, and it's not that it didn't have love. So let's see. Marriage was a practical arrangement, one not necessarily devoid of love, but nevertheless grounded largely in economic advantage. Okay, that makes sense. It was a practical arrangement, but it wasn't necessarily devoid, meaning without love. Here, the second one says, B says, marriage was a practical entertainment, one not necessarily disparaging of love. Um, Practical and entertainment probably don't go as well together as practical arrangement. Um, and yeah, it's not disparaging of love. The disparaging of love could work. Um, the next one for C, for many of the villagers, marriage was a practical attitude, one not necessarily consisting of love. So again, the consisting works, the attitude, it's not as strong. For many villagers, marriage was a practical bargain, one not necessarily worthy of love, but nevertheless grounded largely in economic advantage. So marriage was a practical bargain, a practical deal, and one not necessarily worthy of love. So I think it would be too much in the sentence to say that they either disparage or they marriage is not worthy of love. So those two words might be a little bit too strong for this sentence and what's going on with these villagers. Um, and for many of the villagers, marriage was a practical misfortune, one not necessarily trusting of love, but nevertheless grounded larger in economic advantage. So it would not work because definitely trusting of love does not seem to fit well in this sentence. So A makes the most sense in this sentence to use. All right, so let's keep going. So for number 4, Maggie is a procrastinator, naturally inclined to blank and to blank discussion. So Maggie, the procrastinator. So if we know what procrastinator means, somebody who waits on stuff, naturally inclined to meddle. So a procrastinator does not necessarily mean that you're a meddler. In fact, you may be less likely to be, and to scoff at discussions. Um, so, and those two terms don't seem to really go well together. Maggie's a procrastinator, one naturally inclined to temporize and to prolong discussion. So, temporize, if you think about that word, it has to do with time. So, it's a way to make yourself gain time. And so, look, if you like, think about temporary, things like that. So, that's a possibility. So, we'll definitely pen that one. Maggie is a procrastinator, naturally inclined to misbehave and to disrupt this discussions. So procrastinator doesn't necessarily mean that you're a person who misbehave. Um, so that just would not really go as well together. Um, we have D, Maggie's a procrastinator, one naturally inclined to sneer and to terminate. So sneer does not indicate that you are a procrastinator. Um, and then the last one, Maggie's a procrastinator, naturally inclined to um, withdraw and to intrude in discussion. So the intrude in discussion and withdraw just does not go well together. So temporize, would be the best answer, B, and then to prolong discussion. So, because temporize is something you do to gain time. Excuse me for a moment, because I've been talking a long time. All right, let's look at number 5. Just as glass windows offer buildings both light and insulation, certain atmospheric gases blink incoming sunlight and blink heat radiate from the ground, preventing warmth from escaping. Okay, so conduct is the first one. Just as glass window offer building both light and insulation, certain atmospheres gases conduct incoming sunlight and release heat radiated from the ground, preventing warmth from escaping. So, like the atmospheric gases conduct incoming sunlight and releasing heat radiated from the ground, preventing warmth. So that does not go well together. So let's look at the B, deflect. Just as glass window offer building, because remember, we're comparing it to a glass window. Glass window offer building both light and insulation. Um, Certain atmospheres gases deflect incoming sunlight and transmit heat radiated from the ground, preventing warmth from escaping. Okay, we can hold that. Um, let's look at C. Just as glass window offer buildings both light and insulation, certain atmospheric gases admit incoming sunlight and contain heat radiated from the ground. So again, those two things seem to go well together. So that's something we can hold on to. And then D, just as glass windows offer building both light and insulation, um, certain atmospheric gases absorb incoming sunlight and dispense heat radiated from the ground, um, preventing warmth from escaping. So if it dispense heat, though, that really wouldn't work with preventing warmth from escaping. And E, just as atmospheric gases, um, certain atmospheric gases, sorry, resist incoming sunlight and trap heat radiated from the ground, preventing warmth from escaping. So, and then the first part would be wrong here because why is it resisting um, incoming sunlight? So the best answer here after we've gone through all of them is C, admit. So the atmospheric gas admit incoming sunlight and contain the heat from that sunlight from and radiated from the ground, and it prevents it from escaping. All right, let's look at 6. The speaker praised for her style, yet ridiculed for her vacuity, often moved naive listeners with blank alone and led them to believe that her speech had blank. So it talks about a speaker that has vacuity, which means that no substance. It's just kind of like foolish talk. So she's praised for her style, yet ridiculed for her vacuity, often moved naive listeners with reason alone and led them to believe that her speech had dalliance. So if she's vacuous, her speech is less likely to be full of reason. So that's not a good choice. Um, often move a naive listeners with infelicity alone and led them to believe that her speech had conviction. And those two terms don't work well in the sentence. Let's look at C. Um, ridicule for her vacuity often moved naive listeners with rhetoric alone and led them to believe that her speech had substance. So, and that was one of the terms I used. So, like if somebody is full of vacuity, it often lacks substance. So that would not work. So we have C would be the best answer for that one. And let's look at number 7. The actor was noted for his blank behavior. He quickly became irritated if his every whim was not immediately satisfied. So with this one, and this video is becoming, it's a little too long, so let's go. We're gonna go with, it's deep, petulant, um, but the actor was noted for his petulant behavior. He quickly became irritated if his every whim was not immediately satisfied. So you can think of a child with that term petulant. And finally, Hayley Mills films have been called blank, although most of them are not so sentimental as to deserve that description. So Hayley Mills film has been called trickly, although most of them are not so sentimental as to deserve that description. And trickly does mean something that is overly sentimental. So that word sentimental would be that clue that this is what the best term to put. Cursory means something that is quickly kind of shallow. So, and if you just go through all the other terms, they don't work well. So we're gonna have to stop here for today. But I hope just going through this, you were able to see at just using the process of elimination and looking at the context of a sentence, which one works best for your sentences. All right, see you next time. Bye.